There have been 326 no-hitters in Major League Baseball history, but none were like the no-hitter Edwin Jackson threw on June 25, 2010. He walked 8 batters, he struck out only 6, and he threw a stomach-turning 149 pitches, beating the third-best offense in baseball.
The 0-2 pitch, fastball, ground ball, middle of the diamond, Stephen Drew Fields fires.
Indians have not had a man pass first base. And a ground ball.
There have been no-hitters thrown by one-armed pitchers, no-hitters in the playoffs, and even perfect games thrown by pitchers much worse than Edwin Jackson. So why focus on this particular no-hitter? Well, I think it's a meaningful mile marker in baseball history. It is a strange no-hitter in its own right, yes, but it also represents a pivot in the way managers and teams approach the game today. It marks a final charge into battle for the Knights of an ancient code. Hi, I'm Bradley Woodrum, baseball analyst, economist, and guy who owns one of these little pen things. Today, let's dig into Edwin Jackson's absurd no-hitter and a little thing I like to call Brad Baseball. Probably best known for his ability to fit into so many immaculate grid spots, Edwin Jackson first came to my attention in 2006. As a Devil Rays fan at the time, Jackson was among a young pitching core that looked poised to finally break Tampa Bay out of the cellar they had lived in since they became a franchise in 1998. I think you could reasonably say I was an Edwin Jackson fan. A 3-sport athlete and an outfielder in high school, Jackson never really threw from a mound until he made his professional debut in rookie ball. That awkward timeline, learning how to pitch, but doing so as a professional, led to the Dodgers rostering him early in his development to protect him from the Rule 5 draft. But this forced them to option him 3 seasons because he simply wasn't ready to pitch at the major league level. He wasn't a finished product yet. After burning through those minor league option years, the Dodgers traded him to Tampa Bay, where the then Devil Rays had to keep him in the majors. Otherwise, they were going to risk losing him for a nominal fee on the waiver wire. That meant that the talented but very raw pitcher had to learn on the job in the hardest place possible, a major league mound. Jackson didn't last long with the Rays, or any team actually. He moved around quite a bit, but he certainly lasted long in the league. He played for 14 major league teams and accrued a respectable 8 to 18 wins above replacement, depending on your preferred flavor of WAR. Only once an all-star, Jackson always teetered on the space between reliable innings eater and tantalizing high-end stuff. The YouTube channel Baseball Quotes has a great retrospective on Jackson's career, and I'll link the whole video in the description down below. It's a wild journey for Jackson in his major league career. He never really sticks with one team, so suffice it to say, Jackson, who was this sort of like hired gun journeyman, he is not the most likely candidate for having a no-hitter. Zooming into 2010, up to that point in the season, Jackson had 98 innings pitched with a fairly unsightly 5.05 ERA, but a 3.73 xFIP underlying those numbers. xFIP is a metric that tries to boil down the pitcher's data to just the elements the pitcher has the most control over: walks, strikeouts, and fly balls. That 3.73 xFIP suggests there was some underlying bad luck in his otherwise rough ERA. If we adjust that data to reflect the National League's 4.06 ERA and 4.02 xFIP for starting pitchers in 2010, Jackson's numbers come out to a 1.20 ERA minus and a 91 xFIP minus. In other words, his ERA was 20% worse than league average for an NL starting pitcher, but he had an xFIP that was 9% better than league average. Not great, not terrible. I'm using National League numbers here because Jackson, for all but 2 of his previous 15 games, was facing National League opponents. But his no-hitter is not against just a lineup with a designated hitter. It's against one of the better offenses in baseball. In the first half of the 2010 season, Ben Zobrist, Carl Crawford, and Evan Longoria were all above a 120 WRC+. All three had on-base percentages above 380. Crawford and Longoria were among the top 20 offensive performers at that point in the whole season. Despite that, Tampa Bay as a whole is on a cold streak. I like to put on Edwin Jackson's shoes for a moment heading into this game. It's the first game of the series, so he's probably doing prep like on the flight into Tampa Bay, and he's plenty aware of the team's recent struggles. Over the past 13 games, they have won only 4, and in that time, the Rays have averaged a solid 4.2 runs per game, but Jackson himself has had a great June. He has averaged 7 1/3 innings pitched over his previous 14 starts in June, and held opponents to a stunning 2.76 ERA or a 53 ERA minus. The problem, the serious red flag where we might be seeing an unstoppable force heading towards an object on wheels, is that Jackson has 12 walks against only 19 strikeouts in those last 4 games. And the Rays offense, they're leading the American League in walk rate. All this to say, Jackson was a mediocre starting pitcher with an unlikely, unsustainable hot streak, coming in against a really good offense with an unlikely, unsustainable cold streak. If regression is predictable, this is the game where it would happen. But most emphatically, it did not. Jackson's good luck began the day before the game, when superstar outfielder Carl Crawford left the game with shoulder soreness. As a result, one of the best hitters in MLB at that time wasn't in the starting lineup. Boston Red Sox and Dodgers fans could be forgiven for not remembering how great peak version of Carl Crawford was. From 2004 through 2010, Carl Crawford put up the 7th most WAR among position players, up there with the big names like Miguel Cabrera, Ichiro Suzuki, and my old boss, a guy named Derek. At the end of the season, Carl Crawford would famously sign a huge 7-year, $142 million deal, one of the largest free agent contracts the Red Sox had signed at that point. The deal turned out poorly for the Red Sox and the Dodgers, who eventually traded for Crawford, but we aren't there yet. We're here with peak Carl Crawford, and he is on the bench. Over the first 3 innings, Jackson throws 71 pitches, walks 7 batters, and faces 16 hitters. Keep that in mind. We'll be coming back to that. In the first inning, Jackson strikes out John Jaso on a full count, but it takes 7 pitches to do so. The count goes full against the number 2 hitter, Ben Zobrist, and on the 7th pitch, he walks him. Longoria grounds out on a 3-1 count, and Carlos Placada Peña draws a 5-pitch walk. Edwin Jackson finally ends the inning, getting Matt Joyce to ground out, but it takes 4 pitches there too. In the top of the second, the Diamondbacks take the lead on an Adam LaRoche home run.
You were saying that one is driven.
Jackson's second inning is, again, pretty inefficient. It takes 7 pitches to eventually surrender a leadoff walk to Melvin Upton Jr. on a 3-2 count. He manages to get 2 outs over the next 5 pitches, but then walks Jason Bartlett on the 5 after that. Already facing the leadoff hitter again, he manages to retire him on just 2 pitches. But the 19-pitch inning with significant traffic is not how Jackson or any other pitcher wants to protect a 1-0 lead. In the bottom of the third, he walks the first 3 batters on 15 pitches. He needed this impressive play to keep the game scoreless, much less hitless. He managed to wriggle out of that inning, getting absolute gifts from a pair of first pitch outs, and somehow, someway, he finally settled in. If you're keeping track at home, it's the 4th inning now, and he's already suffered through 7 of the 8 walks we know he's going to have in this game. That means for the rest of the game, he's going to get 4 strikeouts, while only walking 1 batter and hitting 1 batter. That vaunted patient Rays offense gets a little impatient. Over the next 6 innings, Jackson only throws 82 pitches compared to the 71 it took to get through the first 3 innings. This isn't just the Rays' fault here, though. This is a plot showing the pitch locations of Jackson's fastball on the top and his slider and changeup on the bottom. Note, this is from the first year of PitchFX ball tracking, and there's some squiggliness to this data. I've manually reclassified these pitch types because I'm fairly certain Jackson is only throwing 3, maybe 4 pitch types. We can see on this plot that Jackson is really not getting his fastball in the zone, and frankly, he's leaving the off-speed pitches in dangerous locations, especially given he's pitching from behind in the count in most of these plate appearances. Now, this is the same plot for innings 4 through 9. He found his location for the fastball. It is essential to pitch ahead. Like, that's a big deal from all levels, from kid pitch to major leagues. If you start with strikes, you get good results. Look at this plot showing the WRC plus of MLB hitters by count. When batters fall behind, when they get to 2 strikes, they chase more. They create less damage. They make the pitcher's job easier. But it starts with early count strikes. And often, early count strikes are fastballs in the strike zone. Batters are more likely to take the first pitch or foul it off than to put it into play. Now that Jackson has the zone, the Rays are falling behind and unable to break through. Carl Crawford does eventually make an appearance, but only as a pinch runner, collecting a rare caught stealing to end the 8th inning. In the 9th inning, Jackson starts off with a 3-pitch strikeout. Then he, with 2 outs, ends up walking Willie Ibar on 4 straight pitches, but he gets a ground out to end the game.
Middle of the diamond, Stephen Drew Fields fires. He did it! Edwin Jackson just threw the second.
Despite the struggles in the first 3 innings, Jackson makes it through the 9th. He does so while impressively holding his 93-mile-an-hour fastball velocity, and his reward was joining a truly select and impressive group of baseball players. Now let's talk about why this is never, ever going to happen again. We've established the story here. An unlikely pitcher does an exceptional thing. That's a beautiful, very baseball thing to happen. But why am I talking about this no-hitter and not, say, Philip Humber's perfect game, which he threw almost a year before his final MLB game entirely? He had a career 5.31 ERA, but he will forever remain among the 24 pitchers to throw a perfect game. Well, I mean, that's not a bad idea. Maybe I'll make a video about that too. But here's the deal about Edwin Jackson's no-hitter. And I alluded to it before. He just threw way too many pitches. Here's a plot showing the highest pitch count games per year in the RetroSheet database. Unfortunately, we can see the data gets a little squirrely before 1988. The bar chart on the bottom shows how many starts we have at least partial pitch counts for in green and how many we're missing in gray. And you can see that before the 1980s, our data gets really flaky. But even with only partial samples here, it's obvious that it was much more common for pitchers to cross that 140 pitch barrier back when, we didn't really care about counting pitches. In 1989, Roger Clemens threw 131 pitches in an 8-inning outing against the Detroit Tigers. Then, 5 days later, on August 31st, he threw a whopping 158 pitches in a complete game against the California Angels. And then, for 5 of his 6 remaining starts that season, he threw over 120 pitches, including a 140-pitch game against the Milwaukee Brewers to end the season. Also, in 1989, Greg Maddux threw a 10-inning, 135-pitch game against Barry Bonds and the Pittsburgh Pirates. In the Cubs' defense in that game, Maddux was also 3 for 4, so it's a lot harder to pull your starting pitcher in the 10th inning when he's also your best hitter. By the time we get to the 2010s, the gargantuan 150-pitch monster games they're going away. There are really only 2 games in the 2010s that even compare. That's Jackson's 149-pitch no-hitter and this insane 148-pitch Tim Lincecum no-hitter in 2013. The Lincecum game probably deserves a video all to itself, but it's definitely in a different class on a couple of fronts. First of all, Tim Lincecum was a 2-time Cy Young winner and a 4-time All-Star at that point in his career. And he was in the midst of a down season, though XFIP suggests his underlying performance was still quite good. But what's really scary is that Lincecum had only maxed out at 114 pitches up to that point in the season. And in his next start, the velocity was just a tick down, and he got pummeled for 8 runs in 3 2/3 innings. I'm not saying that the no-hitter broke Tim Lincecum or anything like that. Pitchers are volatile by nature of their work. It's noteworthy that Lincecum still threw 350 innings after that no-hitter. He didn't fall off the face of the earth or anything, but he did have a 423 xFIP, a far cry from the 329 xFIP he had in his career up to that point, or the 325 xFIP he had up to that no-hitter in 2013. Again, I don't think this one game broke Tim Lincecum. His velocity did bounce back shortly thereafter, and on the sum total, he really had an excellent top-tier baseball career. It maybe ended a bit early, at least for some people's tastes, certainly my tastes, but maybe not crazy early, given he was a pitcher, and the human body tends to not love pitching in general. It becomes interesting as a partner story to Edwin Jackson's game. Edwin Jackson and Tim Lincecum threw way more pitches in their no-hitters than about any contemporaries would be throwing or even coming close to. We can see that Jackson's 149, Tim Lincecum's 148 are truly anachronistic. They line up much more with early 90s, maybe 1980s type games. If we could expand this data to encompass all games before 1988, well, we would certainly find some no-hitters that would overtake them. It's believed that Nolan Ryan's 1974 hitter required him to throw a comical 235 pitches. So why aren't starting pitchers throwing more pitches? The first reason is obvious: health. It's not too different for when you're raising kids and they get sick or they have a rash or something like that, and you're not really sure it's a big deal, but you never want to risk the worst case scenarios and be second guessing yourself later on. So you act more proactively. You see the doctor, even if it isn't something like in yourself that would rise to the level of taking a visit even to the Washington Nationals, CVS. Likewise, if there's any chance that limiting a pitcher to just 10 or 20 fewer pitches, I mean, we're talking like 2 to 4 fewer batters, helps them and the managers squeeze out an extra 3 starts by the end of the season. You need to take it. Trading 3 batters for any non-zero quantity of games makes sense. So even if the calculus is kind of shooting from the hip a little bit here in terms of how much it keeps a pitcher healthy to limit them to 90 to 100 pitches, it almost really doesn't matter, because a disciplined, careful approach might prevent a team from suffering through an unexpected early decline, or a pitcher suffering through a career spun out early by injuries before getting much-deserved paydays. But honestly, and sadly, the injury side of this is almost a smaller side of the equation. Maybe it's out there and I just haven't seen it, but honestly, I don't know of any conclusive evidence-based research or studies that suggests pitch counts and pitch limits prevent pitcher injuries. Jeff Passan's excellent book, The Arm, really great book, fantastic, can't recommend it enough. One of the things he digs into is the very different pitch count intensive culture for baseball in Japan. We've seen that paradigm shift over the past several years, in part by advocacy by guys like Yu Darvish, who himself has had an exceptionally long and successful, if not perfectly healthy, pitching career. But suffice it to say, it's not certain, at least to me, that limiting pitch counts effectively reroutes the injury risk here. As an aside, I can and certainly plan to go further into the topic of pitcher injuries, but this video is already hilariously too long, and I'm going to have to start cutting corners if I'm going to finish this without losing my mind. What's the real reason pitch counts are going down? Well, it's this little guy's fault. That's right. Matchups. That's right. Matchups. Over the first 3 innings, Jackson throws 71 pitches, walks 7 batters, and faces 16 hitters. Keep that in mind. We'll be coming back to that. At this point in the story, a modern MLB team has their long man warming up in the bullpen, possibly even starting the 4th inning. Jackson has already thrown 71 pitches, and in the following inning, the 3rd batter of that inning is going to be the leadoff hitter and known hippie, John Jaso. It's going to be the 3rd time Jackson will face Jaso in the span of 4 innings. Let's pause and talk about the TTO penalty. TTO stands for times through the order. There's been some debate about its meaningfulness in the past, but from where I stand today and from what I saw MLB managers reacting to in big ways, in effective ways, over the last decade, I can say conclusively that there's real fear around the TTO penalty. Here's the league performance of pitchers 1st, 2nd, and 3rd time through the order. I'm using Baseball Reference here because the layout is so easy, but we can see in 2024, hitters go from a 96 OPS plus the first time through the order, so hitting on average about what Ezekiel Tovar did this season. Not great, not terrible. But the 3rd time through, that 96 adds 17 points of violence, jumping up to a 113 OPS plus. That's turning your opponent's lineup into a lineup of Justin Turners. The YouTube channel Wylytics, has a great video on this subject, and I'm sorry I don't know how to pronounce your channel's name, delving into how the Detroit Tigers made the postseason this year using an opener-dominated rotation for most of the season. I'll link the video down below in the description, but suffice it to say, as long as a team is willing to potentially strain the pitching depth that they have in the minor leagues and possibly expose a few good players onto the waiver wire, teams benefit from avoiding the 3rd time through the order penalty. It's a severe drop-off in performance. Interestingly, the same penalty existed in about equal proportions in 2010 when Jackson was pitching his no-hitter. And given he has performed so poorly up to this point, it's reasonable, or rather I think it's obvious, that the right choice is to pull him in the 4th inning, maybe even before the inning starts. But Jackson, who started his career as kind of this hard-throwing righty and ended as a league average starting pitcher, despite losing only 1 mile an hour on his fastball, which again speaks to kind of A, like how he defied the aging curve, but B, how the league caught up to that velocity. Jackson at this point, though, is still a flame-throwing right-handed pitcher who can dial it up to a then scintillating 96 miles an hour. And he hasn't given up a hit. So how can the manager pull him? A no-hitter is an extremely incredible, meaningful achievement for any player, and even modern managers are really resistant to pulling a guy who has a no-hitter going. But no-hitting a team through 3 innings really isn't like no-hitter territory. The critical difference here is that modern managers, looking at their matchup sheets in the dugout, are going to recognize that Jackson is no longer their best option for getting outs. He clearly does not have the command of his pitches. It happens, but he's only about 40, maybe 50 pitches left until he's going to start, seeing a downtick in velocity and performance on the pitches even further. Jackson has run a 956 xFIP through the first 3 innings. No rational manager today would expect him to have a 356 xFIP through the final 6 innings, which is what he ultimately does have. But let's say that the 956 xFIP is more noise than data. The manager thinks there's reasons why that 956 was there that doesn't project any future performance. And the manager's thinking that, maybe Jackson will get back to his normal 370-ish xFIP performance soon. That is still a problem because his opponents are already seeing him for a 3rd time. Jackson, to his credit, had a very decent TTO split in his career. That may have been a byproduct of him being able to outstuff opponents and hold his velocity and pitch shapes, especially early in his career when his velocity was more of an outlier relative to the league. Also, it may have had even more to do with survivor bias. He had a brutal 5+ ERA in the first and second innings in 2010, which tracks with kind of a career pattern. He either got blown up early and just stuck it out through the rest of the game, or, he dominated. And on this day, Jackson managed to kind of circumvent that early game danger and found his rhythm. That's not something modern pitchers do. They don't really have an opportunity to do it, and they're not expected to do it. Outliers in the TTO penalty exist, but the norm, the rule, is that 3rd time through the order, you almost always have a better option in the bullpen. And that's really what it comes down to. I've heard some fans and even some coaches talk about how modern pitchers aren't up to the same tough task that Roger Clemens and Greg Maddux and the pitchers of old were, but it's their data. It's Roger Clemens and Greg Maddox's struggles to face a lineup the 3rd time that helps form the foundation of this analysis. The gap in performance between relievers and starters really hasn't changed since the 1980s. It's not that suddenly relievers are so much better that we have to use them. Maybe the high end of reliever performance demands attention, but in reality, the difference here is how we perceive our starters. Let's imagine a modern starting pitcher has thrown 100 pitches after 6 strong no-hit innings. Presuming the medical team does not conduct a violent overthrow of the manager's regime, after 6 innings, 18 outs, the pitcher will necessarily be facing the lineup a 3rd time through. The typical pitcher is also going to have lost 0.5 to 1.5 miles per hour on their fastball, heading into that 100 pitch mark. What bullpen on earth can't outperform that pitcher for just 3 innings? Only the tippity top tier of starting pitchers are going to make more sense than your late inning relievers at this point in the game. And those guys, the super elite starting pitchers, they, more than anyone else, are going to result in, training staff revolutions. Edwin Jackson wasn't a superstar, and he wasn't even really pitching a great game, but he faced that lineup a 4th time in the 7th inning, and he managed to make history. Before the season is over, Edwin Jackson will be traded to his 5th MLB team, the Chicago White Sox. By the end of the 2010 season, the Arizona Diamondbacks hire Kevin Towers as GM, which, according to my understanding of the oral history, begins the Diamondbacks' long, steady path into the heart of analytics. They have one of the largest and most robust R&D departments in the league right now, as far as I understand, and with that, they would now know better than to leave Jackson into that game. I imagine with all this said, you might think I'm actually anti-analytics. The data says pull Jackson, but the history says leave him in. His arm doesn't fall off after the game. He went on to pitch 9 more solid seasons. He did better than the numbers said he would. But while I love the story, and I love the incredible personal achievement in the no-hitter, I kind of prefer the team sport version of this. That's really what we're talking about. leveraging the ability of the whole team, not just the starting pitcher, but also like the coach, the scouts, the bullpen, the analysts, everybody coming together and making something better on the aggregate. The amazing individual accomplishments might become more rare with that approach, but I imagine if we ask Edwin Jackson heading into 2010, would you rather have a no-hitter this year or win a World Series? He, like most any other player I've ever known, would choose World Series. Or both, because he ended up getting both, being traded the following season to St. Louis, where he won the 2011 World Series. Starting pitchers already apply a disproportionate amount of pressure on the result of any given game. They are to baseball what quarterbacks are to football. Them losing ground in their impact on the game isn't necessarily a bad thing, in my opinion. The Tigers using openers in their way to a playoff run isn't what the team planned to do, almost certainly. But it's the most effective way to deploy their given resources. And their job is to win. And personally, I don't hate watching opener games. Relievers are fun. They have nasty stuff and weird arm angles and facial hair to die for. Moreover, this is the sport where arguably the most accomplished active player, Mike Trout, has reached the playoffs once. Shohei Ohtani is on his first playoff run only now. Jacob deGrom has only reached the playoffs twice. And Aaron Judge has never played in a World Series. It's a team sport. It's meant to be a shared load. Losing individual accomplishments, and you can see here on a prorated basis, no-hitters are actually trending down. But losing those big individual achievements is okay by me. Even the best accomplishments still require some help from your teammates.
Jay Upton, bouncing ball, Reynolds coming home with it from his knees. What a
Anyway,
play
I hope
by
this was
Mark Reynolds.
enjoyable, interesting, or at minimum satisfying background noise while you do work. If you've made it this far, why not feed the YouTube algorithm a spicy like button or a glutinous subscribe, or heck, tell me in the comments why this video should have been even longer. Until next time, thanks.